Hello and welcome everyone, this is Epigenic Gamer bringing you an in-depth guide to the Shadow Priest in Legion. My character name is Divineas. I am playing on the Grand server in Europe, and with this character I have been able to get multiple top 10s throughout Hellfire Citadel Mythic in progression, so that gives me some credit to my explanation of the Shadow Priest and what I want to make clear on what I think is the best, what I think will be useful, and how you should play the Shadow Priest. So during this guide I will talk about a few subjects, namely your basic spells, your talents, my personal recommendation of these talents, your basic rotation, and some advanced stuff you could do during your rotation, the Legion artifact weapon, in which we will switch over to the beta realm in order to see that. And lastly, I will talk about add-ons. All these chapters will be linked in the description below, so you can look at what you do want to see and what you don't want to see. So let's start with the spells. I will quickly go over the spells and talk about the most important one, which is Void Form. Everything in Legion Shadow Priest revolves around Void Form. At 100 Insanity, you can cast Void Eruption. Increasing the damage you deal by 20%, reduces the cooldown on Mind Blast by 3%, and grants an additional 1% haste every 1 second. Your Insanity will drain increasingly fast until it reaches 0 and Void Form ends. And when Void Form ends, you gain Lingering Insanity. This is a buff. It allows the stacks that you have come up with, or you have accumulated during Void Form, to persist for 1 minute as a haste buff. This also obviously means that during Void Form, if you have 34 stacks, you will have 34% increased haste. Now, towards our DPS spells. Basically, Shadow Priest has always evolved around dots, mainly Shadow Word Pain and Vampiric Touch. Shadow Word Pain, a Word of Darkness that causes 7,000 shadow damage initially, which is not very important, and an additional 63,000 damage over 14 seconds, and it regenerates Insanity. It regenerates 3 Insanity per tick. And Vampiric Touch, a Touch of Darkness that causes 105,000 shadow damage over 18 seconds and heals the priest for 50% of the damage dealt. The more targets you have with Shadow or with Vampiric Touch on it will obviously mean your passive health regeneration will go up by quite a lot, especially in raids. This can be very useful. If it's the spell of Legion Horror for 3 seconds only sees any use in PvP, and it regenerates 4 Insanity per tick. So you can see that Vampiric Touch is actually ticking, or it gives you more Insanity than Shadow Word Pain. However, Shadow Word Pain doesn't have a cast time. To our other DPS spells, mainly Mind Blast. Mind Blast the target for 31,000 shadow damage and it regenerates 12 Insanity. You want to keep this off cooldown as much as possible, especially in your Insanity building phase. And last but not least, Shadow Word Death. A Word of Dark binding that inflicts 37,000 shadow damage to the target and only usable on enemies that have less than 20% health. It regenerates 10 Insanity baseline or 30 if the target dies. And I actually forgot about this, Void Eruption. Mainly the bread and butter spell of this spec. It releases an explosive blast of pure void energy and it activates Void Form. It does a small amount of damage to targets hit by Shadow Word Pain or Vampiric Touch. It's just a nice visual. I wouldn't recommend dotting 25 different targets for some reason and then you doing Void Eruption just for the sheer explosion damage of it. It's not worth it. It's a hassle. Just try at least to get 3, 4, 5 targets and then use Void Eruption. It will make it so that your Insanity generation will also keep going passively throughout Void Eruption. Now the most important spell during Void Form, if you enter Void Form with some dots up on your target and your Insanity starts draining down. So what happens with Void Eruption? Void Eruption changes to Void Bolt. So the moment you use Void Eruption, you can cast Void Bolt. It sends out a bolt of pure void energy at the enemy, causing 33,000 shadow damage and refreshing your dots. Basically, this means if you want to get around 4 or 5 high HP targets, and you can keep cycling through them and use Void Bolt to keep all the dots on them from ever expiring, which means you have an insane amount of Insanity generation, which means you get more stacks of Insanity, which means a higher Insanity generation. However, Void Form means in void form, your insanity drain will increase over time. So basically, it's a running, ticking time bomb in which at some point you will eventually use or lose void form. The thing is, using void bolt, keeping your dots up, will make it so hopefully you'll stay in void form as long as possible, get a high stack amount, so your haste starts ticking tremendously, meaning your dots will tick faster, not harder, but faster, so you get more damage out. Now, onto our offensive cooldowns. We have Shadow Fiend. I know it says Mindbender, it's normally Shadow Fiend. Anyway, it summons a Shadow Fiend / Mindbender to attack the target for 15 seconds, and it doesn't generate insanity, it only generates insanity when you're using Mindbender, which we'll talk about later. Anyway, it's just your basic, you put it, you activate it, and you use it to do damage. It does have a small spell, the Mindbender, or the Void thing, whatever it's called, in that it will give you 15% increased damage for 6 seconds on your target. However, it does this passively. I haven't found use for it at all to make it so you cast your own version of it. Basically, you macro it to your bar and you press it yourself instead of automatically letting your Shadow Fiend do it. So basically, it's just fire and forget, and it's great. That's basically all our offensive cooldowns. There isn't that much else, except for from your talents, of course. So onto our defensive cooldowns. We have Dispersion. This used to give you a 90% damage reduction. Now it's only 60%, but you are unable to attack or cast spells. It is castable by Stun, Fear, or Silence though. It clears all the snare and movement impairing effects when cast and makes you immune to them while dispersed. The amazing thing about Dispersion though is it doesn't drain insanity. So, for some reason, if you want to prolong your void form, and I personally think you still do more damage if you just keep casting and let void form expire. But if you want to continue with void form, you can cast Dispersion at the last possible second and get 6 extra stacks of void form. Our next defensive ability, it's not really there. We are really baseline, or we've gone baseline. You have your normal power with shield. It doesn't really absorb that much, but it does prevent damage from delaying spellcasting, which is okay, especially during leveling. I can see the use of this. We have our healing ability, which is Shadowmend. It wraps an ally in shadows, which heals for 58,000 damage, but at a price, considering that you will take 29,000 damage over 10 seconds. So it gives you about 29,000 heal, which isn't that much. However, we also have Empiric Embrace. It fills you with the Embrace of Shadow Energy for 15 seconds, causing you to heal a nearby ally for 40% of any single target shadow spell damage you deal. So if you're soloing, it means 40% of your damage basically translates to healing to you. In Raid, it just does this to a random target. I'm not sure if it is always on you. I don't think so. Anyway, so our movement abilities, we have none. That's it. Only through talents will we get movement speed. So I will talk about that in the talent section. And our utility, which we basically already talked about, is basically, or the most used one is Vampiric Embrace. We have some really unique and niche ability called Mind Control though. Mind Control is amazing. You have some fights like Blast Furnace in Blackrock Foundry where Mind Control was absolutely necessary, so you could speed up certain objectives during that fight. It can be altered during the or with the talent system, which makes it so that instead of losing control over yourself, you actually gain a pet, which makes this pretty much a must-have in those types of fights. I don't see a lot of people using Master Spell, which I really want to hammer on. Master Spell is absolutely insane. It is such a good way to deal with debuffs that you can dispel. It helps out your healers, it helps out your tanks, it helps out everyone, and everyone has a good time. Don't be afraid to use Master Spell because it's only like a 1.1 second cast, only 1 GDC. It's insane. Now to our very niche abilities, we have well, you obviously have Fade. I haven't seen, or if you have a good tank, you won't see much use of it. However, it removes all threat for 10 seconds from you. It's the same as, I think Warlock has an ability like this as well. However, if you have removed all your threat for 10 seconds and nobody has attacked your target, it will go back to you. We have two types of dispels though. We have Dispel Magic, which dispels the magic on the enemy target, removing one beneficial magic effect. This can be really good. It can basically dispel very good defensive cooldowns of your enemies, or give you or remove defensive cooldowns on your enemies. There are some fights in which dispelling magic is actually beneficial. Usually healers take this over, but if you find yourself in a position where you can use this, I suggest you do, because if you don't, you basically fuck up your raid. Purify Disease. It removes all disease effects from a friendly target. Not much use will be seen out of this, and I can't really see when we'll use this. We have Shackle Undead. Same principle, not really much use of this. And we have our Silence. It's ridiculous. We have a Silence on a 45-second cooldown. Due to the removal of major cliffs, I don't think we can even reduce this back to 25 seconds that it used to be, or 30 seconds, I'm not sure. However, it silences the target, preventing them from casting spells for 5 seconds, and against non-players it also interrupts spell casting and prevents any spells in that school from being cast for 3 seconds. It's okay. Other classes can do this type of job way better than we can anyway. And we have our basic Priest Resurrect. So, onto our talents. The first group of talents are mainly revolving around insanity gain, or doing increased damage. The way that Shadow Priest works at the moment, especially with the raid encounter, is that there will be ads. There will be loads of ads. You can't dot them all. It will be useless. So I personally go for Twist of Fate, especially in the combination with other talents that we'll talk about in a little while. Twist of Fate really shines. It gives you a flat 20% damage increase every time you deal damage to any target below 35% health. It's insane. It gives you an amazing increase in damage in raid encounters. You also have Fortress of the Mind. Mind Flay and Mind Blast deal 10% more damage and generate 20% more insanity. So we have our basic filler spell Mind Flay, which generates 8 insanity, and with this talent it becomes 10. Small increase. I personally don't feel this is worth it. And Mind Blast will also generate 20% more insanity, which makes it from 12, it will go to 15. Again, I don't really think this is that amazing of a talent, especially compared to the way raid encounters are at the moment. Twist of Fate is just impossibly better. Maybe in early, very early Emerald 9 Bear, or in single target boss fights. No, not even in single target boss fight. I will just say Twist of Fate is better, straight up. You also have Shadow at Void. Blast the target's mind for 23,000 shadow damage, but it regenerates a buttload of insanity. It regenerates 25 insanity. However, the big drawback of this is it's on a charge system and it has a 30-second recharge timer. Meaning that the times that you can use it, great. You can also use other things, and I personally don't think your DPS will suffer, your insanity generation will not increase by such a significant amount that I think this is useful. Onto our movement. We have Mania. You move 1% faster for every 5 insanity you have. Shit. Total shit. Since you'll be dropping in and out of Void Form, using Mania at the wrong, or using Void Form at the wrong time will make Mania useless. So think about things like Operator Thogar, in which during Mythic you had to run across the entire room to avoid the trains. Pop Void Form at the wrong moment while using Mania, and you would have 0 insanity. You would move with regular speed without any movement speed for yourself. So that leads us to Body and Soul, our go-to spell at this moment, or our talent at this moment. Power Word Shield increases your target's movement speed by 40% for 3 seconds. They changed Power Word Shield. You don't have the debuff anymore at all. This means you can basically just every 5 seconds give yourself a 3-second 40% increase in movement. It's not the best, it's not the worst, it's okay. Onto Masochism. This is not a movement, but more a survivability talent. When you cast Shadowment on yourself, its damage over time heals you instead. So instead of damaging yourself for 29,000 damage, you actually gain heal over time effect on yourself for 29,000 healing. It's okay during leveling. I don't see much use for it elsewhere. Onto our CC. We have 3 forms of CC. Usually, or without any talent, you have your Psychic Scream. It's on a 1 minute cooldown, and it makes it so that targets will flee for 8 seconds in every direction. I personally don't like that. It makes you lose a bunch of control over the mobs that you're targeting during leveling, and in a raid encounter it's especially useless since people are just targeting adds anyway, and you want your tanks to pick up everything anyway. So this leads me to basically choosing either Mind Bomb or Dominant Mind. Mind Bomb is great for every fight where you don't have to use Dominant Mind, basically. So if there's a fight like Blast Furnace and you want to mind control a target, use Dominant Mind. If not, go for Mind Bomb, because what does it do? It gives a target a 2-second debuff. If it dies or if it expires, the target will unleash an explosion, stunning all enemies within 8 yards of the target for 2 seconds. Again, it's not the best, it's not the worst either. Onto mainly our insanity altering spells. You have Void Lord, which Lingering Insanity, so the haste buff that you get after leaving Insanity form. Lingering Insanity persists for 8 seconds after you enter your next Void form. Normally, when you enter your next Void form through Void Eruption, you instantly lose your haste debuff, or your haste buff. Using Void Lord makes it so that your haste buff will go on for another 8 seconds during Void form. It's okay. It really depends on your playstyle and how good you are with something else called snapshotting, which Reaper of Souls is insane for. So you remember when we talked about Shadow with Death, that it was only usable on enemies that have less than 20% health, and it would only baseline generate 10 insanity instead of 30. It would only generate 30 if it dies. Reaper of Souls, however, changes this. It makes it so that Shadow with Death is now castable on targets below 35% health instead of 20, which makes Twist of Fate infinitely better, because it makes it so that every target below 35% chance, you can Shadow with Death it, get the full insanity, as though it killed the target, and it will automatically activate Twist of Fate. This means that especially low HP targets that you don't really want to dot anyway, because their HP is really low, you can use snapshotting. So during your normal rotation, you would quickly turn to that target, use Shadow with Death, get the Twist of Fate buff, get the 30 insanity, and your damage would increase tremendously. During certain fights in Hellfire Citadel, like Archimonde or Manoroth, or any other fight containing adds like Xul'Rak, you could basically keep Twist of Fate up for the entire fight. I think maybe 1 second or 2 seconds at the start of the fight you won't have it. Otherwise, you can always keep this up. You also have Void Ray. This, in my opinion, is the worst of the bunch. Each time your Mind Flay or Mind Sear deals damage, you gain 10% increased Mind Flay and Mind Sear damage for 6 seconds, stacking up to 6 times. This is your class trinket from Hellfire Citadel, minus the damage increase to Mind Blast. It works in the same way. Your target will get a debuff on them, and it will make it so that you do an increased amount of damage with Mind Flay or Mind Sear to that target. I don't see the benefit of this. I think using this setup will first off make it so you use your Mind Flay almost as little as possible. So you either wouldn't get the full benefit out of Void Ray. I think the Reaper of Souls gives you more insanity. It also lines up perfectly with Twist of Fate. I wouldn't use Void Ray. I don't recommend it. Now onto our dot altering talents. We have 3 of them. Send Lane, really basic. It increases the damage dealt of your Vampiric Touch by 20% and the healing of your Vampiric Embrace by 20%. A flat damage buff is okay, and the healing of your Vampiric Embrace by 20%, meaning you get 60% healing of your Vampiric Embrace. It's also okay. However, it doesn't really do that much dynamic things. It doesn't help your insanity generation. This is where Auspicious Spirit and Shadowy Insight come in. Auspicious Spirit is basically the go-to talent the moment you hit a certain haste cap. I would say even very early on in the expansion, Auspicious Spirits will still outperform Shadowy Insight. So what does Auspicious Spirits do? Your Auspicious Spirits now deal 100% increased damage and generate 4 insanity. What do Auspicious Spirits do generally? When your Shadow Word Pain damages over time critically strikes, basically every time your dot crits, every time it dot or your tick of the dot crits, you also create a shadowy version of yourself that flows towards the target and deals 6,000 additional shadow damage. You don't really do this for the damage though. You use it because it generates 4 insanity. So if you have a high haste and crit, and you have a lot of auspicious spirits, because you're talking about a lot of targets, your insanity generation will skyrocket. However, when you have low crit and low haste, Shadowy Insight might be more your thing. When using Shadow Word Pain, its periodic damage has a 10% chance to reset the remaining cooldown on Mind Blast and causes your next Mind Blast to be instant. This makes it so the more targets you have, the more Shadow Word Pains you have, the more your Mind Blast will reset. However, this has one major issue. If Shadowy Insight doesn't proc in time, and you use Mind Blast off cooldown, and while you are casting Mind Blast you get the Shadowy Insight proc, you are still doomed, because it will make it so that your Mind Blast will still have the normal 7-second cooldown. However, when next you cast it, it will be instant and you can cast Mind Blast straight up again. However, the big thing here, during those 7 seconds, any other Shadowy Insight procs that might have happened during that time are immediately cancelled. They do not prioritize. So you could be wasting 7 seconds of Shadowy Insight procs, which has happened to me a lot of times during beta and live testing. So I would say that in pretty much either you have very low haste and crit, I would say that Auspicious Spirits will always pull out ahead. Now, for our DPS cooldowns, this is our second set of DPS cooldowns. Power Infusion is a straight up, you have 20 seconds, it increases haste by 25% and increases insanity generation by 25%. Basic, doesn't do that much extra. Is it powerful? I have not found that much use for it again. There are certain situations where it might be useful, especially during early Legion. I can see myself playing Power Infusion. Because, like I said before, a big thing is your Shadow Fiend, it skills on haste. So if you have not that high, you don't have that much haste, it becomes progressively worse. So Mindbender actually changes Shadow Fiend from a 3-minute duration cooldown to a 60-second cooldown. This means that you can basically use it as much as you can possibly can. It also generates insanity with every time it attacks. So the lower your haste, the less it attacks, the less damage it will deal, the less insanity it will provide you. So there is a sweet point, and at some point the people that calculate these things will make it so that there is a haste point or a crit point in which Mindbender will again override Power Infusion. Basically, or I think this personally will happen the moment you hit Emerald Nightmare Gear, normal Emerald Nightmare Gear. Then to our only actual AoE spell, Shadow Crash. I was really hyped for this, and it let me down. Frankly, I will actually show you how it looks like. It looks okay. There's a big problem with it though. It generates 15 insanity. It's okay, it's not a lot. The problem though, the damage is not that great. It's on a 30-second cooldown, so it's not really that amazing. You can't use it that much. I can see people using it on the imps in Manoroth, for example. However, it comes with a huge drawback, which is this. So if you cast Shadow Crash, it has a reasonable AoE. However, 1, 2, 3, it has a tremendous traveling time, meaning that if you put it wrong or your tanks are derping and pulling the ants away, you could completely miss your Shadow Crash, not get any damage done, your insanity generation would not have been worth it, and you basically waste so much of your damage. And another thing is, especially again using the example for the Manoroth imps, they don't live 3 seconds. Depending on your guild composition or your raid composition, Shadow Crash will land after the ants have died. You can obviously prevent that by precasting it. However, then you have the problem that your tanks or your DKs, everyone that uses a pool or where you're going to place your ants, need to be on point. If it's not, You will miss your Shadow Crest, you will miss your damage, and still Mindbender in total damage will pull out ahead, usually. So again, Mindbender is probably the best, especially at higher haste levels. Now, Legacy of the Void, Mind Spike, and Surrender to Madness are level 110 talents. You will actually only choose between Legacy of the Void and Surrender to Madness. Mind Spike, I don't see the use of it, and I am actually hesitant to even talk about it, but I will. So it assails the target with a shadowy spike like it used to. It does very low damage, but it leaves a spike embedded in the mind, and Mind Blast will detonate these spikes, each dealing 200% of the original damage to the main target and 100% to all nearby targets. And it generates 4 Insanity. So you will keep the passive uptake of Insanity, but you will reduce it by a really small amount, if I'm correct. Or it's the same. It's not that big of a difference. However, the idea of this talent is that you stack about 10 Mind Spikes on a target and then you use your Mind Blast to detonate it. So you have to set up your AoE. You have to make sure you don't Mind Blast that same target to get the damage out on all the targets. This means, for example, again using Manoroth as an example, it will mean that for 10 seconds at the very least, actually no, for about 12 seconds, since the cast time is 1.12 seconds, so for 12 seconds you don't use Mind Blast. You will lose out on 24 Insanity and 60,000 damage while you're spending time prepping this. You won't be using any other spells, so you won't be using, for example, Mindbender, you won't be using Mind Blast, you won't be using Void Bolt to set up Mind Spike. Can you see the problem here? It takes such a huge amount of preparation and dedication of your general GCDs to get Mind Spike to actually do something, and even then it's shit. So don't use it. I personally wouldn't use it at all. It becomes even worse when you're actually in Void form. Talking about Void form, these are the 2 spells that you will likely be using. Either Legacy of the Void or Surrender to Madness. So let's first talk about Legacy of the Void. Void form may be activated anytime your Insanity level is 70 or higher. So this is open to everyone. You try to get as much Insanity as you possibly can. You're just doing your thing. You're placing your dots. There we go. You're not watching every second to your bar, and there we go. You're already at 100 and you're forgetting to activate Void Eruption. So Legacy of the Void makes it that much better, because you can activate Void form a lot earlier and more to your control. Big thing to know here is this absolute sweet point to activate Void form is 85 Insanity. It will actually, the math has already been done, it will make it so that you can keep Void form up for about 5 or 6 seconds longer than if you use it at a 70 or 100. The other spell is Surrender to Madness. Really good. I absolutely love it. I think people don't really get this talent at all. So all your Insanity generating abilities generate 200% more Insanity, i.e. you will stay in Void form much longer, and you can cast while moving until you exit Void form. Don't use this at the start of a fight, don't use this while leveling, you're an absolute idiot if you do this. So what do? Take a fight like Arcament. It has a pretty extended execution phase, which can often lead, especially during progression, it can lead to death because you don't have the DPS to deal with it. This Surrender to Madness will massively increase your damage. So since you can stay in Void form for so much longer, your haste will get to such an absurd amount of regenerating your Insanity that at some point you will hit what we call the 100 club, meaning you have 100% increased haste. It's great. However, if your Void form falls off, so you don't get enough Insanity generation to keep it going, or the debuff runs out, it's actually a 3-minute timer that you're on, you'll die. And you can't be combat rest. They changed this, which makes absolute sense. You can't just expect like having 4 combat rests and 4 Shadow Priests. 4 Shadow Priests using Surrender to Madness, they die, they get combat rest, they Surrender to Madness again. Their DPS will be so insane, and it will just be cheating at some point. However, this increase in damage especially during progression and farm, during very early progression or very late farm, makes this talent insane. During Hellfire Citadel now, I use Surrender to Madness on every fight except Hellfire Assault. Your Insanity, especially because our haste is a bit high, we can keep the regeneration of Insanity going for very, very long without that much issue. And we can get to 100 very quickly, and I can usually keep it up for about 2 minutes, something. So doing this during progression actually really increases the damage you do during a very difficult execution phase. So it bumps up your raid's DPS by quite an amount. However, the drawback of this is if you use it too early or too late, you don't get the maximum benefit out of it. Using it too early means that you still fuck over your raid team because you're not there for the absolute pinnacle of execution phase, which we're using Surrender to Madness for. And if you don't use it early enough and too late, you won't reach the point where you're actually a huge benefit for the execution phase for your raid team. So, my personal recommendation for Shadow Beast: Twist of Fate for sure, Body and Soul for sure, Mind Bomb for sure, Reaper of Souls for sure, Auspicious Spirits may, in really unique cases, be switched for Shadowy Insight if your haste is incredibly low or your crit is incredibly low. I would in early maybe use Power Infusion in early Legion, but usually I will go for Mind Bending anyway. During progression, that doesn't include a lot of, or it doesn't include a big execution phase, use Legacy of the Void. If not, and it does, and your raid needs that extra DPS during the execution phase, use Surrender to Madness. Now, let's go to our rotation. So we've already talked about our basic rotation. I think my usual opener at this point when using Mindbender is very simple. You pre-pot at some point or just before you're using Mind Blast. So Mind Blast into Mindbender, since it's on such a short cooldown and it regenerates its sanity, then you go and target all your things with dots while keeping Mind Blast off cooldown. There we go, Void Form, and keep Void Bolt on all your targets. You can see that I am actually refreshing my sorry, I'm actually a bit focused right now. You can see that I'm refreshing my dots manually at the early stages of this fight and then using Void Bolt, because usually it does make it so that the moment you enter Void Bolt, Void Bolt will be on a long enough cooldown that you can't really keep all your dots up from the get-go. So again, Mind Blast, and there we go, we lose Void Form. This was actually a pretty bad one because I was more focused on talking. Usually when with 4 targets you can go to about 40, maybe 35-40. On 2 targets or 3 targets you most likely be looking at a window from 30 to 35, and single target 30. Now this is where it gets interesting. So let's start up again, so to get our dots going, and now let's use Surrender to Madness and let's see how far we can get. And this is what I mean where you get a huge amount of insanity regeneration going, and at some point you will see the spec taking off. At that point I will probably talk a little less, but there's a very important part that will come up though. So at about 60 to 70 insanity, your rotation in Void Form will change so that it will actually only include Void Form or Void Bolt into Mind Blast, into Void Bolt, into Mind Flay, into Void Bolt, into Mind Blast, into Void Bolt, into Mind Flay. So that is your basic rotation at that point. We're already almost at the point where we're reaching the type of haste we need to pull that off, and it makes it so your insanity regeneration is at its peak. Here we are, we're at 50 stacks now. You can see I am just keep switching the targets to get all my dots ticking with Void Bolt. Here we go, go. Keep Mindbender off cooldown because the insanity generation is actually worth it, and obviously the damage is insanely high. I almost forgot to refresh the dots on that target. Silly me. And here we are, we're now approaching, no, we're actually already at the point in where we're using Void Bolt, Mind Blast, Void Bolt into Mind Flay. You can see the Auspicious Spirits going, by the way. It's absolutely insane. Can't talk right now. Focusing, trying to get to the 100 club. I think I can make it. Yeah, I easily make it. Now, at this point, you're doing this basic rotation, and this is actually all there is to it. It's a bit of a hassle to get into, but once you get it down, you can see your DPS skyrocket tremendously. So your normal DPS on 4 targets will be around, for me it's around 120. So let's see in a little while how high we can actually go. So the important thing is instead of the only thing I would suggest doing at some point, instead of using Mindbender during this Void Bolt, Mindflay, Void Bolt, Mind Blast, Void Bolt cast time, you will use it in the normal time you would be using Mindflay. So you won't be using it strictly off cooldown. You make sure it's in that right window. Otherwise, you're... There we go. Ah, we're dead. Otherwise, you will lose too much insanity generation. You will. You don't have 2 seconds. You will lose your void form in about 2 seconds, so you don't have time to cast 2 spells, and one of them being a fucking Mindflay and a Mindbender. You want to do Void Bolt, Mind Blast, Void Bolt, Mindbender, Void Bolt, Mind Blast, Void Bolt, Void Bolt, Jesus, Mindflay, and your normal thing right there. So that's basically how everything goes. I can't really make any way to improve that, other than the things that we talked about. At some point, when the target is low, you will be using Shadow Word Death in the same way, actually. So you will be Void Bolt, Mind Blast, Void Bolt, Shadow Word Death, Void Bolt, Mind Blast, Void Bolt, Shadow Word Death every time it's off cooldown. It has 2 charges now, 9-second recharge, so you can do it a lot of times. And if you're not using Shadow Word Death during that window, you will go to Mindbender during that window. If you're not going to Mindbender during that window, then you can use your Mindflay. But you try to use more higher insanity generation during that little window. And you can see your DPS will actually get up very high. And this was without any proc from or any buff from Twist of Fate. So you can imagine doing 20% increased damage over 207k at this point, meaning you do about 230,000 damage on 4 static HP targets, of course, without that much buffs. So that's basically everything in the rotational department. You can, I think I talked about it. You could also use dispersion to cancel the insanity drain. So for example, if you're at that point where you're just about to die and you want to have 2 or 3 more seconds, use that dispersion. Wait at that point. Usually it's at the point where you can use Shadow Word Death. Wait for Shadow Word Death to come off cooldown. Then Shadow Word Death, Void Bolt, Mind Blast, Void Bolt, Shadow Word Death. It will mean you get about 5 or 6 seconds more to do damage, and it can mean the difference between killing a boss and just wiping at 1%, which has happened to a lot of people in the past. So this is where we'll actually switch to the Legion Beta Realm. So I'll see you there in a bit. Here we are on the Beta Realm. As you can see, I'm using a completely different setting for my UI. It's shit, I really don't like it, but I haven't been spending that much time on the Beta Realm lately, and this is the latest version of LVUI to come out, and I haven't optimized it yet. However, we can see our artifact weapon. So we're using the artifact weapon Xalatoth, Blade of the Black Empire. As you can see, it gives crit and mastery, and the off-piece gives crit and haste. So the first thing I really don't like is it gives mastery. Mastery in Legion, or it just increases the damage of your Shadow Word, Pain, Vampiric Touch, and Void Bolt by a percentage. I would have loved to see this going to haste, especially since our early haste in Legion is quite diminished. It also gives you the ability Void Torrent. Void Torrent is a very cool ability. It does an incredible amount of damage, and the good thing about it is it gives you a hold on the drain of your insanity. So you can see where this spell would really come in handy, especially when you're not using Surrender to Madness, or actually if you use Surrender to Madness as well. So here we go. Bam! Void Torrent. You can see it does quite a lot of damage, and it stops the insanity from draining. I'm sorry you can't really see the insanity bar that well over here. Now, onto the artifact powers itself. You start with Void Torrent, as we talked about. Now, my personal recommendation, and however the math on this has not been done yet, but I can imagine this would by far be the best setup, is you really want to go for Sphere of Insanity quickly. It's either Sphere of Insanity or Mass Hysteria. They are both really good. So what's the path that leads towards this? You start with Void 7. It increases the damage dealt by Mind Flayer by 20%. You can probably sense how enthusiastic I am about this. It's useless. It's just a filler point. Now, we can use Death's Embrace, or we can go for Unleash the Shadows. My personal recommendation, again, is because we want to go for that haste and we want to go for that insanity generation, you go for Unleash the Shadows. It makes it so that your Vampiric Touch critical strikes have the same chance, or have a 45% chance to create shadowy apparitions. Meaning, again, with let's see where the talent thingy is. I really hate this setup. There we go, the talents. It means that your shadowy apparitions now do that regenerate for insanity, meaning that both your Shadow Word Pain and your Vampiric Touch have a chance to give you Auspicious Spirits, which is great. Now, to the pain, this is a straight up increase to your Shadow Word Pain damage. It's okay, it's great. Creeping Shadows increases shadow damage dealt by 3%. It's again okay, it's just a damage buff. Now, to Sphere of Insanity, this is a nice one. The Sphere of Insanity manifests for the duration of Void form. Your Void Bolts, Mind Blast, and Mind Phase cause the sphere to duplicate 5% that damage to all enemies affected by your Shadow Word Pain. This comes down to this. I'll show you. It has a pretty unique visual to it as well. So let's quickly go into Void form. Here we go. Void form. There we go. You don't really see the sphere, but every time I'm using Void Bolt, or I mean Mind Blast, or Void Bolt, I'm not sure if it's also on Void Bolt, doesn't really matter. But every time you do that damage, it will duplicate it to any nearby target that is affected by your Shadow Word Pain, of course. That's the visual of it. I'm sorry I can't really keep Void Form up that long in this build because I'm not using the a good setup, and I was just messing around with trying to get as much mastery as I could, seeing if that would increase my DPS. It didn't, by the way, so don't use it. So to our following artifact abilities. Thrive in the Shadow. Dispersion, this is the thing I was talking about earlier on their defensive cooldowns. Dispersion heals you for 50% of the maximum health over its duration. Whoop-de-doo. Useless during most raids. From the Shadows, reduces the cooldown of Dispersion by 20 seconds. Again, whoop-de-doo. It's, I can see the use of this more. However, there's already such a limited amount of time we're actually using Dispersion, so reducing the cooldown of it, it's okay. Mind Shattering increases the damage dealt by Mind Blast by 5%. Again, just a passive increase in damage from Mind Blast. Now, Mass Hysteria is very interesting. I haven't unlocked it yet. However, every 1 second, Void Form increases damage dealt by Shadow Word Pain and Vampiric Touch by 2%. This stacks until Void Form ends. Now, normally when you're running out of Void Form, it's around 30 stacks with sufficient haste and sufficient targets. And it'll reset. But think about the following. What if you're using Surrender to Madness on those execution fights? Can you see it? 100%, or I mean 100 stacks in Void Form, meaning you get 200% increased damage done by Shadow Word Pain and Vampiric Touch. However, you can stay in Void Form longer than 100 stacks in 100 seconds. I think my maximum was about 2.5 to 3 minutes. So you get an insane amount of increased damage from your Shadow Word Pain and Vampiric Touch, and it will really add up incredibly quickly to the damage. So Mass Hysteria together with Sphere of Insanity is going to be amazing. I would personally first go for Sphere of Insanity and then go for Mass Hysteria, because Mass Hysteria is mostly or significantly better with Surrender to Madness than without. However, we won't be using Surrender to Madness that much in comparison to Sphere of Insanity, which is always up during every void form ever. So Death's Embrace, just a pathway to this. I would actually recommend perhaps not going for Thrive in the Shadow and using that point extra to go to Death's Embrace, but on the other hand, you reduce the cost of Mass Hysteria by about 2 points by not using or by not going for Death's Embrace. So I think I might actually skip Death's Embrace for quite a while, because you really want to go towards your third artifact ability called the Void. So the way to get there is either through Void Corruption, which increases the damage done by Mind Seer, which is really bad because we're not going to use it much at all, and Mental Fortitude, so healing from Vampiric Touch when you're at maximum health will shield you. Both of these are actually really bad. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to go for Thoughts of Shadow. Now, the increase in healing from Shadowment is indeed really shit. However, this Sinister Thought, it increases the damage done by Void by 15%. Dumping 1 point in this for 15% extra damage from Void is quite substantial, and I would really like that. The only problem I see with taking this path is that, or wait, this is actually really interesting. I thought this was linked, but it's not. So you're going to forget about these two anyway. Okay, so we're going to Touch of Damage, which increases the damage done by Vampiric Touch, which is your passive dot damage, and then into Call to the Void. So Mind Flay has a chance to spawn a Mind or a Void Tentacle that channels Mind Flay at your target for 10 seconds. This can be, again, really good to regenerate Insanity. I believe it regenerates Insanity anyway. However, due to the fact that these two are so close to each other, I would still go for Sphere of Insanity into Mass Hysteria. So that's basically everything about the artifact weapon, and I think it's about time we head back to the live server, because there's not much that we can do at this point. I will make an updated version of the Shadow Priest guide when we have the full Emerald Nightmare and Nighthold tier set. Now, back to the live realm. I will talk about my personal recommendation in add-ons. It's actually really easy. I only use, the add-ons that I use are obviously, as you can see, I'm using the default LVUI setup. I've changed some things to make sure that I have my cooldowns here, the spells that I frequently use in the second bar, and my normal things that I can, normal spells that I can use anytime except for my silence. So I should probably use my or get my silence anywhere here. Furthermore, I'm obviously using weak auras. Every raider should have that, because it just allows you to make macros and indications for just about everything. And I would recommend every single Shadow Priest to download Twin Tops Weak Aura set for Shadow Priest. It gives you, I'm only using the Insanity bar. I think a lot of the extra stuff in it is not really mandatory, but the Insanity bar itself is insane. It gives you an indication of how much Insanity you're getting per second, what your drain is at some point, what percentage you're at, etc. It actually, if you're using Legacy of the Void, it'll give you an indication when it's at 70%. It's absolutely great. The reason that it disappears with me is because I only have it active during combat. Now, the last add-on that I would recommend, and this is something that has just changed. It used to be that all these targets were all mashed in one pool. Now, however, since the launch of the pre-patch, every target has their unique ID. This made it so, just like for healer frames, they could make a DPS frame. So you can just click on targets and cast all your spells like this. Even better, I haven't done this myself yet, but you can make mouse over. So if it's just on this target and I would press my button for Shadow Word Pain, for example, it will automatically target that target and cast with Shadow Word Pain on that. It is a blessing for every dot class out there. So Affliction Warlocks, Druids, Shadow Priests are getting a massive increase in the damage they can potentially deal through this system. And that's actually all that I'm using. By the way, this add-on is called Enemy Grid. And this is a first iteration of it. It will be updated a lot quickly because it's just so new. And you can customize it quite heavily. I'm just using a very basic setting of it, since it's I only want to use it for dot tracking. Anyway, I think we've talked about pretty much everything you'll ever need to know about the Legion Shadow Priest. So this was Epigenic Gaming, and I'm signing out. If you enjoyed this in-depth guide to the Shadow Priest, be sure to check out my channel, especially in the Legion launch. I will be posting a lot of my Shadow Priest footage and about every kill that we obviously get in the new raiding. And I hope to see you all again very soon. Have a good one, and have a lot of fun with your Shadow Priest. I know I am having it. And goodbye. See ya!